I'm so glad that you have joined us for today's abiding reflection. Did you know that relationship is not the same as fellowship? Not at all, actually. You know, you can have relationship with someone and not have fellowship with someone. I'll give you an example. I have many cousins. Both my mother and father came from very large families, and they in turn had large families. So I have cousins that I've never met. They're much older than me. Some have passed away. I never met them. And yes, we are related. We have relationship. They are my first blood cousins, not distant cousins. They're first cousins. Never met them. We are tied by a family tree. DNA would tie us together, that we are related, but I never had fellowship with them. Unfortunately, I know married couples, and they have a certificate of marriage that proves that they're in relationship, that they're in marital relationship between a man and a woman, marriage. But they don't have fellowship together. They don't fellowship together. They're in relationship, but they don't have fellowship. And so on and so forth. You'd be surprised to know that in the New Testament, this word relationship doesn't appear once. Fellowship does. Christ called us to himself for fellowship. There are some people that say they have a relationship with Jesus Christ, and they'll hear from him, "Depart from me, for I never knew you. I never had fellowship with you. You claimed that I was your Savior. You claimed that I was your Lord, but I never knew you. We never had fellowship together. In your mind, we had relationship, and it didn't go further than that." In 1 John, John tells us that they had fellowship with Jesus, and John describes that fellowship in 1 John chapter 1, verse 1. He says, "We have heard him." And that word heard is not just to listen casually or to hear casually. Is we hung on his every word. We were changed by what we heard. And that came by spending time with him, by fellowshipping with him. We heard him by fellowshipping with him. Are you hearing him by fellowshipping with him? By fellowshipping with him, not by listening to Bible studies or reading commentaries, but are you hearing from him because you're spending time with him, fellowshipping with him? John would also say, we've seen Jesus. By spending time with him, by fellowshipping with him, we've seen him and looked upon him. That's different than seeing him. Looked upon is we studied him with our eyes. We made careful examination with our eyes. We looked at him with scrutiny. We studied him, is what he's saying. We studied him. His character, his person, his love, Christ's amazing love, and how he spoke to people and ministered. We studied him. We looked upon him. And then John says, we have handled with our own hands. We've handled him. We've touched him. We've broken bread with him. And saints, that's the question today. Are you in just relationship with him, or are you in fellowship with him? Are you hearing from him? Are you handling him? You know, are you looking upon him, his character and his nature and his dealings with you in fellowship, in intimacy and fellowship and closeness with him? Relationship is not the same as fellowship. John goes on to say that you may have fellowship with him. He describes all of this, and then he says that you may have fellowship with him. And then he says, if you walk in darkness, you do not have fellowship with him. You can't have fellowship with him and walk in darkness. John says, don't lie. Don't deceive yourself. You can't say that you have fellowship with the light of the world, Jesus Christ, and be walking in darkness. Matthew chapter 10, verse 1, Jesus called 12 disciples to him, that is, to himself, that is, to fellowship. He called these 12 men These 12 men surrendered their entire lives to Jesus Christ, so that if Jesus Christ said, we're going to Capernaum, guess what? They were going to Capernaum. If he said, we're going to Jerusalem, we're going to Jerusalem. If Jesus said, cross this lake, go on to the other side, they were going to cross the lake, go on to the other side. Everything that they did and said came from fellowship with him. That's what the first ministry of any pastor should be, fellowship with Jesus. That's your ministry, pastor. It's not teaching or preaching or outreach ministry or evangelism. It's none of those things. The first thing is fellowship with him. That's it. Fellowship with him. It says here that he gave them power. Where did they get that power? From fellowshipping with him. See, they weren't in just relationship with him. Jesus didn't call them to himself and then they all went home and then they said, you know, we're disciples of Jesus. We have relationship with him. We do online courses with him or something. That's ridiculous. No, they had daily fellowship with him. And ministry was born out of that fellowship. I will tell you something. In 30 years that I've been a pastor, I have never, ever, ever pursued ministry, ever. That has not been my goal. My whole desire is to fellowship with Jesus. That's it. That's where ministry is born. That's where everything that has happened in my life has been born from that deep desire to fellowship with Jesus, to know him, to be known of him, to spend time, to hear him, to be comforted by him, to be ministered by him. I have nothing to give anyone if I don't spend time with Jesus, if I'm not fellowshipping with him. And that's what we learn here in Matthew 10. He called these 12 men to himself, and then it's amazing, he gave them power. I have to wonder where some ministers are getting their power from. They're not fellowshipping with the Lord, and I wonder where they're getting their strength and their power from. What selfish ambition or desire. And then it says, look at, Jesus goes on to say, he names the 12. And then look at verse 5. He says to these 12, he says, do not go. Look at, Jesus tells them where not to go. Jesus tells you what not to do. And then it says, look at verse 7. It says, as you go, preach saying. Wait a minute. So Jesus is actually telling them what to preach. Today, again, there's a lot of pastors. Pastor, please listen to me. If you have how-to books, how to preach, how to be persuasive, how to encourage people, throw those all away and just spend time with Jesus, fellowship with Jesus. He'll tell you what to say. You'll get it from him. You'll get it from fellowshipping with him. People have asked me, where did you learn to preach? What seminary did you go to? I didn't go to seminary. I didn't learn how to preach by man. Man didn't teach me how to preach. I learned how to preach by spending time with Jesus. He tells me what to say. He tells me where to go. He tells me what not to do. It says here, look at even the finances, verse 9. Jesus says, provide neither gold nor silver nor copper in your money belts. I'm going to provide for you. Don't worry about the finances. In 1 Corinthians chapter 2, verse 4, he says this. I was with you, verse 3 actually, I was with you in weakness and fear. See, you would look at the Apostle Paul in weakness and fear. It says, in much trembling. He wasn't healthy. He had something in his flesh we don't know. Some people say it was something wrong with his eyes. Others say it was like this recurring case disease, malaria, who knows. But he wasn't healthy. He was weak, fearful sometimes, looking over his shoulder. Paul was a wanted man. And you can tell by looking at him that the strength that he had wasn't his own. The wisdom that he had wasn't his own. In fact, the words that he preached weren't his own. He tells us that in verse 4. He says, and my speech and my preaching were not with persuasive words of human wisdom. Take the book that you have motivational speaking and books that you have on how to inspire others, inspirational teaching or persuasive speech. You know, you can take a course on persuasive speech. I actually went to I was invited to go to this pastor's huddle sort of thing, and one of the workshops was how to preach. A guy younger than me never mentioned prayer, never mentioned spending time with Jesus, just a whole bunch of how-to steps. I was so grieved, so saddened. That's the majority of pastors today, using persuasive speech. They're very eloquent, very charismatic. Paul was sickly, fearful, stuttered probably. There wasn't nothing to look at. But boy, look at what it says here. He says, I didn't come with persuasive words of human wisdom, but in demonstration of the Spirit and of power. When Paul opened his mouth, people knew that the words they were hearing came from God himself. From his deep fellowship with the Lord in the furnace of affliction, these powerful words didn't come from human wisdom or persuasive speech or from seminars or courses or seminary. Came from fellowship with Jesus, and people knew they were hearing from God and not from Paul. That's amazing. You know something? Peter and John in the book of Acts, they were speaking also. These are Galileans. They're country bumpkins, right? And so they were brought before some people in authority. And it says, the Bible's very clear in Acts, it says that they were unlearned fishermen. Unlearned fishermen. That is, they didn't go to seminary. They didn't take, the courses or anything like that. But they had spent time with Jesus, and the unbeliever knew it. It says, and they knew that they had been with him. They spoke just like Jesus told them to speak, in the power and authority of Jesus Christ, in the fellowship of the Spirit, in fellowship with Jesus. And then you can hear it in their speech. And people knew it. There's no way these guys could be speaking with such authority, with such power, with such conviction, people getting saved, people's lives being radically saved. This is not Peter and John. This is something greater, something more. And it was Jesus. It's not something greater or something more. Someone greater, someone more, Jesus Christ. Paul goes on to say here that your faith should not be in the wisdom of men, but in the power of God. Oh, I don't want your faith to be in the wisdom of men. I don't want your faith to be in me. I don't want your faith to be in some pastor that you follow, some teacher, Bible teacher that you follow. Your faith has to be in the power of God. You have to have fellowship with Jesus Christ. You have to have this union and communion with Jesus Christ. Let me tell you something. This fellowship, Abide Christian Fellowship, this church, I'll tell you how it was born. Myself, my dear bride, our 2 children, we have 3 children, but only 2 went with us to go to spend 3 days, I think 3-4 days alone together, fellowshipping with Jesus, fasting, praying, weeping, crying before the Lord for 3.5 days. We left this home and we traveled 3 hours away to just spend time in the presence of the Lord, to fellowship with him in essence. And from that was born a fellowship of about 18 people. Those 18 people are still a part of the fellowship of Abide Christian Fellowship. They're still a part of the church. You know who you are. I have fond memories of our early meetings, just fellowshipping together, crying together, hurting together, ministering to one another. But you remember that our time was just fellowshipping with him, praising him, thanking him, reading the word, encouraging one another, fellowshipping with him and fellowshipping with one another. That's how this fellowship started. We moved some 17 times. That's how many times we've moved. And then, you know how the church was born? Abide Christian Fellowship? This church was not born, please listen to me. It wasn't born because I thought we needed another church, because I thought it was a good idea, because I put a committee together to see where we can plant the church. None of those things. None of those things. I'll tell you how the church was born. I fellowshiped with the Lord for 24 hours. A day and a night spent with the Lord, just seeking Him, fellowshipping with Him, handling Him, observing Him, looking upon Him. This church was born in His heart, not in my heart. People ask me, what is your vision for the church? How in the world can I have a vision for a church that's not mine? It's not my church. I didn't birth it. It was born in the heart of Jesus Christ. It was birthed by the Holy Spirit. We've never worried about the finances. He has told us 17 times where to go. In fact, Christ, all fellowship with Jesus, and not a leadership team or a deacon board, this has all come about with fellowship with Jesus. Fellowshipping with Jesus, he told me, don't get a building. A building is not for you. Think about it. If we had gotten a building, this church is now going on 4 years old. It's 3 years old. I think we're on our 4th year. But check this. If we had gotten a building, wow, would we have been in trouble. 3 years ago, we didn't know there would be coming a pandemic. We didn't know all the financial crisis. But the Lord knew. See? And by fellowshipping with Him, by closeness, intimacy, communion with Jesus Christ that I have with Him, He revealed to me, no building. Not for now. A building is not for us. Okay, no building. And we'll follow you. And you dictate to me, and I'll tell the church. We've moved 17 times we've moved. We've done everything, listen to me, we've done everything backwards according to what everybody says. These expert people that are, studied in seminary, and church plant and church growth. The church has grown. Every time we've moved, it's grown, and that's why we've moved 17 times, because this fellowship continues to grow. It's been truly, truly amazing. But the church, the fellowship was born in the furnace of affliction with me, my wife, like I said, and that's how the fellowship was born. Fellowshipping with Jesus, 3 days. The church was born, me fellowshipping with Jesus. 24 hours just in His presence, talking to Him, getting His heart. I'm not in relationship with Jesus. I'm in fellowship with Jesus. Yes, I am in relationship with Jesus, but it goes much further than that. I'm not just a child of Him or a child of God or a disciple of Jesus Christ. I have fellowship with Him. And I'm encouraging you to do the same, especially in these dark days in which we live. When you're going to follow a man that has some motivational slickness to him, today there's so much cleverness and slickness and smoke and mirrors. If that's what you're following, be careful. Start fellowshipping with Jesus. He's going to tell you to stay away from false teachers, false doctrine, stay away from all that stuff. But you're going to get it by fellowshipping with Him. Fellowshipping with Him. Relationship does not equal fellowship. That's what I want you to get away from this. Abiding reflection. May you have a wonderful day of fellowshipping with Jesus today and until the day He takes you home. May the Lord bless you.